Hi everyone, a pleasure to meet you even though it's virtually. I'm Elona Shatri and I will be presenting our dataset paper today. George could not attend today's workshop, so I will be presenting alone. We are part of the Artificial Intelligence and Music group from the Center of Doctoral Training based at Queen Mary University of London, and if you're interested, a new cohort call will be open by the end of the year, so keep an eye on that. Given that we are familiar with OMR, the OMR problem, here goes a quick recap. OMR, in short, could be the process of going from an image print scan of music to an editable or replayable file format, such as music XML, MEI, MIDI, and so on. This allows for editing, adding missing voices, converting them to other file formats, creating demos, archiving, searchability, plagiarism check, and so on. OMR is still a very challenging research problem, including but not limited to the challenges listed here. While there have been systems developed by some of the other attendees today in monophonic scores, the threshold has yet to be crossed to other more complex scores. This mainly comes from the lack of a standardized and better fitting computer representation of music. While creating new data sets, that's one thing to keep in mind. How can we at the same time introduce a representation that could possibly encode music complexity and be fit for machine learning models? Along with that, we have to consider diversity in data, such as image quality and printing type. Some amazing work has been conducted in the past few years with some quality data sets produced, so allowing harmonization is important, and this whole cycle goes back to increasing diversity in data. As we know, OMR has been tackled in 4 main stages, so it's important the same data set can satisfy more than one stage of the process. Some of the existing data sets that have been recently used more in OMR research are shown in this table. While these data sets do include different types of data and printing data size, number of classes it includes, they also are used for different stages and different end goals. In our attempt to address some of the challenges I mentioned earlier, last year we started working in collecting a new data set. Together with Steinberg's DoReMi team in London, we made some tweaks and we were able to retrieve and collect DoReMi from using their music notation software DoReMi. The data set is derived from scores originally used for testing purposes. This includes both real-world scores and synthetic scores built to test particular engraving use cases. The process of creating DoReMi using DoReMi code starts by creating a meta picture of a single glyph or drawable primitives to allow generation of bounding boxes and pixel masks at the origin of the coordinate system. Rendering them at the origin ensures minimization of the variations introduced by anti-aliasing artifacts. The vector-based glyph or primitive is then rasterized to a monochrome pixel-based image. Subpixel positions might introduce some variations and shifts in the bounding boxes that are relocated to the original drawn positions. However, bounding boxes are accurate enough for all the objects except for some shifts in stuff lines. During rasterization, some stuff lines become thicker than the others, sometimes falling out of the bounding box. Such inconsistencies are easily optically noticed given the even space nature of stuff lines and can be minimized at the cost of increasing the resolution. And then finally, the images are exported to PNGs. The published version of DoReMi dataset includes 44 scores, or nearly 5,200 pages, with nearly 1 million primitives. The data includes OMR XML files in 2 types, the main one which contains visual, musical, and relationship information for each score, and the clean version of only bounding boxes and pixel information for each page, thus used only for object detection, classification, or instance segmentation. Along with those, it has also the corresponding music XML, MEI, binarized PNG images at 300 dpi, MIDI files, and the respective DoReMi projects with the customized settings used during producing. The visual information in the OMR XML includes the bounding boxes and pixel mask information that shows which pixel in that bounding box belongs to the given object, as seen in the code box below. This allowed us to perform object detection and instance segmentation and create a baseline for DoReMi. While the visual information does assist in detection and classification, it does not go beyond that, which is why we retrieve some higher level music information presented in the primitive respective node. As each symbol in music has very specific information, such as playable notes or interpretation symbols such as time and key signature, each class has different features or information. As an example, a clef may include an event ID, clef type, hotspot, staves required, position, and a stave ID. Playable notes such as note heads include more duration information, pitch, and so on. A detailed table of information for each symbol is in the data documentation GitHub page, which I will share in the end. We also retrieve some logical relationships similar to music notational graph, or MONG, with no order information. At this stage, not all objects have relational information. For instance, augmentation dots do not have that. Objects that do have such information either have inlinks or outlinks. Looking at this very bad drawing, for instance, we can tell how many nodes are beamed with one beam. The number of inlinks and beams infers that and points to the nodes it links to. Likewise, each node has outlinks to the beam it belongs, the stem, possibly slurred ties, or other objects, so the complexity of one unit or object is raised, and we could use limitations based on class or objects it's linking to. For instance, we can consider only node heads, stems, and beams as an object. If the class is something else, then we disregard that relation. Moving on, in our paper, we presented a baseline of object detection in DoReMi using Foster CNN models with different feature extractors and pre-trained weights. We were able to get an MAP score of 64.8, which is still lower than stave-wise detection score from Mischema++, and this may come as a result of full-page detection in DoReMi. Number of stop lines in the set used is limited to 30 per page, and reduced number of classes from 94 in the original dataset to 71. Here we show some of the elements detected and the confidence score on a test image accompanied by the frequency they appear in the dataset. So we can see that objects that appear more usually translates to a higher confidence score of detecting them in test scores. Class imbalance will always be a limitation to any sheet music dataset. While in the experiments I just showed, some cleaning was done to produce a more balanced dataset that did not solve the problem, since the removed classes will appear in scores during usage or inference. We can at some level deal with this challenge randomly drawing objects in new pages. However, having only primitives, it does not make much sense. That is because, for instance, drawing stems individually in staves could be mistaken for bar lines. So without nodes close to them to inform better, they would end up as the same object as another object. But by adding more data that is more informative, such as node heads, which are, again, the most common objects, we risk to keep that imbalance again. As mentioned earlier, variety in data is another limitation. A possible way to augment this data could be having pictures of the printed scores instead of the nicely rendered DoReMi produced at 300 dpi. We could also introduce noise to these pictures or take pictures at different angles, blurry and with bad quality. Another issue with the existing dataset is the lack of the real-world scores, which could potentially hurt in the later stages. Moving on, after objects are detected and classified, we need to put them back together. So let's say we want to construct either an OMR XML or a music XML from the classification results. So with our current classification results, we could create heuristics in order to rebuild the relationships between detected objects in links and outlinks, and based on the position, clef, and flat sharp combination, add the pitch information to the object. We can build inlinks and outlinks from the inference results, moving on to linking primitives to form more meaningful symbols, a step closer to construction. But to move further on, we need temporal relationships as well, which for some simple scores is easy to infer, but in more complex cases, not so. Using bounding boxes and their proximity to each other could work to some extent, but there are cases where their proximity has nothing to do with the object they belong to. Therefore, finding a way to feed the inlinks and outlink information to the network is necessary and needs more thoughts. So this data set is published in Steinberg GitHub page, but at the moment is private and probably will be open in public by Monday. the latest. So be sure to check it out and please give us some feedback. I just wanted to add something which I forgot to mention there, is that we have the pipeline which is easily can be easily used to extend the dataset, and which we're planning to do and include more real-world scores. I will also include, I will send the links to the documentation, which is open, but the dataset itself is still private. So yeah, if you have any question.
Okay, thank you. Well, have you finished? Okay. They started applauding while I was speaking. Well, I was going to say thank you, Elona, and I was going to ask you if you have finished by that time, but yeah, I guess this closes the question. Well, thank you very much for your talk. And okay, is there questions? Well, you can raise your hands. Also, people on site can raise physically their hands, as Alexander has done now. Yeah, although you cannot see him. And this poses an interesting question of how we do this now. Okay, Alexander is going to, yeah, speak loud. Maybe you will hear the question.
So my question is, in your data set, you obtain music, XML, and MEI files, the same scores. How do you obtain the MEI files in your pipeline?
Oh, so that's because Dorico is not able to produce the MEI files. So I use some of the online tools that I found to produce the MEI files from music XML.
You export to music XML and then you convert that to MEI.
Yes.
And you verify that all information is still in the MEI file?
I verified some of them. It looks like it is okay. Some things missing, but it looks like it's fine. We'll see if I can find some better tool to get a more accurate convertation.
More questions? Raise your hands. Okay, I have one. Since okay, maybe I should raise my hand anyway. And okay, I'll give work to myself. Okay, so during your presentation, you mentioned that your in and out relationships are similar to Monk, but are they similar or the same? I mean, is your dataset compatible with Monk data, like that you can use the same API or at least the same, data logging process? Because that would be great, actually.
Yeah. For in-links and outlinks, it's not at the same level of information that MuseSchema++ has, but we're working on that. We're looking if we can infer more in-links and outlinks for some objects that are still missing this information. So hopefully we'll be ready to harmonize with MuseSchema. But in the object detection stage, I mean, bounding box and everything is just ready. I mean, we could just, I think even the class names are the same. So that's ready to use with MuseSchema.
That's great. Okay, so you are not establishing the same connections, but the way you establish the connections is the same. Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, you don't have to stick to the way MuseSchema++ is done. And okay, is there